So digging in for a little bit on carbon offsets to follow up on the carbon neutrality discussion. You can see this slide here at any time in terms of how I'm structuring the conversation, and I'm going to keep this very short and sweet. The issue of offsets is a big one. I worked on the first carbon offset project in 1988, which gives you an idea of how long it's been around. There is a huge literature on the topic that you can explore here in the carbon offsets deep dive within the climate web. But let me just walk you through the key issues to be aware of, particularly in the context of carbon neutrality claims. And to do that, let me just switch back over to this camera. So it's been around for a long time, all sorts of different programs over the last 20 years, all sorts of use of offsets under voluntary programs by the electric utilities, or you can buy carbon offset tickets for your airline flight, all sorts of things going on that have helped generate offsets, whether it's stoves, more efficient stoves in developing countries, whether it's the capture of methane that would have otherwise just been emitted to the atmosphere at a closed coal mine. Tons of different ways of doing carbon offsets. Now, I should note that carbon offsets are going to get trickier and trickier in the future because there are more and more programs to do climate change mitigation out there. So as China starts to impose a carbon price and have carbon policies and carbon mandates, for example, it's going to become a lot harder to find cheap carbon offsets that you can sell here in the US that originated in China. So there, in some sense, as we move towards more and more carbon pricing, as we move towards more and more policies and measures to help implement the COP21 targets, the idea of carbon offsets is going to get trickier. And that's just something to bear in mind looking forward. What's the key issue with offsets? If you want to offset an emission that you are making, you have to make something happen that wouldn't have otherwise happened. And that's called additionality. And the key variable, the biggest variable for carbon offsets is the question of additionality. I once said at a conference, in fact, one of the earlier conferences of the parties in a presentation, I said, never has so much been said and written about a topic where people don't agree on what they're talking about. And that just gives you a sense into how confusing the additionality conversation has been. Let me just say that the key issue is, are you making something happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened? Because if you're not, then you're not offsetting anything by definition. And if you are, you still have to be able to demonstrate it, you still have to be able to measure it and all sorts of other things, monitor it, verify it, etc. But the fundamental point is that offsets have to be additional. And that's the thing to bear in mind. And that's the key aspect of offset quality. Now, how can you as a potential consumer of offsets evaluate offset quality? Very tough to do. You basically have to rely on whatever program you're buying the offset through or whatever standard was used to certify that offset. And that's tricky because there are good offset standards, there are questionable offset standards, there are good offsets, there are terrible offsets. So unfortunately, it is actually very difficult to know with any confidence just going in what you're buying. A number of years ago, my firm was contracted to put together a retail offset guide a guide to retail offset providers. And just to give you a sense of the interest in that, we weren't looking at offset projects because that would have been a huge effort. We were just looking at offset providers. That report was downloaded more than 100,000 times from the website that it was found on. So there's a lot of interest in this, but unfortunately, I can't point you to a simple answer to the question of how do I know I'm buying something that's quality. And we'll be addressing this in other videos, so I'm not going to go into it any more deeply here. I will note that a number of years ago, we actually designed, again, in an earlier incarnation of our firm, we actually designed a tool to help score the quality of carbon offsets. Not in terms of saying yes or no, because the reality is that you can never say yes or no to offset quality. All you can really say is how much confidence somebody can have that they are buying a quality offset and something that represents an activity that would not otherwise have happened. You can be more or less confident. You can never know for sure. And that was the idea behind this voluntary scoring tool, which unfortunately we never got any interest for in the market because people just didn't want to know. It would have simply invalidated a lot of the offsets being sold out there, or not so much invalidated them, but thrown them into question because they would have come up with a very low score on this offset quality continuum. And so we never were able to develop a market for this tool. So that just gives you a sense of how tricky this whole offsets area can be. And remember, I love offsets. I did the first carbon offset more than 25 years ago. So if you want some more information along these lines and about offsets, etc., I'm happy to be in touch on that. But this was just a quick dig into the carbon offset topic to help you better understand carbon neutrality.